The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, a playground for the wealthy where every accent, every gesture, was scrutinized like a performance. Billionaire Victor Langford, draped in arrogance as much as in silk, smirked as he turned to the man tending to the floral arrangements. Mateo, the gardener, had been asked a simple question in English, and his accented reply drew a wave of laughter from the elites nearby. "Listen to him," Victor sneered, raising his glass of champagne. "Can't even pronounce the words properly. And yet they let people like this work here." The guests chuckled, nodding as if cruelty were a mark of sophistication. Mateo lowered his gaze, the ridicule familiar but still sharp. He seemed ready to retreat into silence, until Victor pressed further. "Well, gardener? Nothing to say for yourself?" Mateo looked up at last, eyes calm but steady. And then, with a voice clear and commanding, he spoke, not in broken English, but in flawless Latin. The ancient words rolled off his tongue with elegance, filling the hall with stunned silence. Even the judge presiding over the cultural event leaned forward, eyes wide. The laughter died instantly. The gardener they mocked was about to teach them all a lesson they would never forget. The chandeliers cast golden light across the ballroom, reflecting off crystal glasses and polished marble. It was an evening designed to showcase refinement, a cultural competition where the elite flaunted their knowledge of history, art, and language. Guests whispered in French, Italian, and German, each accent sharpened to impress. At the center of it all stood Victor Langford, billionaire heir and self-proclaimed patron of the arts. He relished the spotlight, every gesture exaggerated, every word dipped in superiority. When Mateo, the gardener, appeared briefly to adjust the floral arrangements near the judge's table, Victor saw an opportunity. The man's presence, plain clothes, weathered hands, and a humble bow, was a stark contrast to the glittering display of wealth. "Ah," Victor drawled, champagne glass in hand, "our very own gardener. Tell me, good man, do you know the names of these flowers in English?" Mateo looked up politely and answered with quiet respect. His English carried a heavy accent, the vowels rounded by his native tongue. "Yes, sir. These are lilies. Symbol of purity." The words were correct, but Victor's smirk widened. "Did you hear that?" he said loudly, glancing at the aristocrats clustered around him. "Purity." But spoken like a peasant chewing his words. "My dear friends, this is what happens when one spends too much time in the dirt." Laughter rippled across the group, thin and cruel. Mateo lowered his eyes, his cheeks warming with quiet shame. He had endured this kind of scorn before. Still, each insult was a thorn in his chest. Claudette Voss, the judge for the evening, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She was a woman of icy composure, her role to evaluate wit and knowledge. Watching Victor torment the gardener, she sipped her wine as if entertained by the spectacle. Victor pressed further. "Come now, gardener. Tell us something else. Surely you know the Latin name for these flowers, yes? Or is Latin too refined a language for someone who spends his life pulling weeds?" The guests chuckled again, emboldened by Victor's mockery. Mateo inhaled slowly, feeling the sting of every word. He knew the answer, of course he did. But he also knew the rules of this world. Men like him were meant to stay silent, to avoid drawing attention, to never outshine those who considered themselves superior. He hesitated, and Victor seized the silence as proof of victory. "Ah, just as I thought. He knows only enough to tend the soil. Leave the wisdom of words to those who can afford an education." Claudette finally spoke, her tone smooth but dismissive. "Indeed, Mr. Langford, it is hardly fair to expect scholarship from staff. Let's not waste too much time." Her words, though softly delivered, stung even sharper. To her, Mateo's silence was confirmation of his place. Mateo felt the weight of the room pressing against him. To them, his accent was a weakness, his humility a flaw. They saw only a gardener, never the man he truly was. Victor raised his glass higher. "Ladies and gentlemen, here is the truth. Some are born to cultivate beauty, and others to understand it. Let us toast to that difference." Crystal clinked as laughter filled the ballroom once more. Mateo's hands tightened around the edge of the table he was adjusting. He had endured enough. But still, he kept his composure. Years of labor had taught him patience. Tonight, patience would soon reveal its reward. Then came the challenge. Perhaps bored with his own cruelty, Victor turned toward the judge and declared, "Claudette, why don't we put our gardener to the test? If he can answer one question in proper Latin, I will double my donation to tonight's cause. But if he fails, he should be dismissed at once. After all, why keep staff who can't rise above menial labor?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. The stakes had been laid out cruelly: humiliation or dismissal. Mateo stood frozen, every eye in the ballroom locked on him. His job, his livelihood, suddenly rested on a game designed for his downfall. Claudette leaned back in her chair, lips curved in a thin smile. "Very well," she said coolly. "Let the test begin." The laughter quieted. A hush swept across the hall as the challenge hovered in the air. Mateo's heart pounded, but behind his silence, something powerful stirred. He had been mocked, underestimated, and cornered. Yet within him lay a knowledge older and deeper than any of them expected. The moment of humiliation had reached its peak. Now came the turning point, the chance for Mateo to answer in a way that would stun them all. And here, right at the peak of tension, everything hangs by a thread. The gardener, mocked, cornered, and dismissed, now faces a challenge designed to break him. But what comes next will flip the entire room upside down. Before we reveal how Mateo responds and how the elites react, let me ask you something. If you believe that true worth isn't measured by wealth or status, but by wisdom and dignity, then you'll want to see what happens next. Take a second to subscribe to this channel right now. That way, you won't miss stories where the underestimated rise and the arrogant learn their lesson in unforgettable fashion. Now, let's return to Mateo, because his answer will change everything. The silence in the ballroom was thick enough to choke. The crowd of elites, moments ago roaring with laughter, now leaned forward with eager eyes. Victor Langford had set the stage. Either Mateo stumbled and faced dismissal, or he performed beyond anyone's wildest expectations. No middle ground existed. Mateo straightened his back. His modest clothes, his calloused hands, his quiet demeanor, none of these mattered now. What mattered was the fire that had lived within him since childhood, a love for language nurtured in dusty libraries and whispered prayers. His father, a teacher in a small village, had once told him, "Words are power, Mateo. And Latin is the root of many worlds." Those words, once seeds, had now grown into strength. Claudette Voss lifted her chin, preparing to deliver the test. Her eyes were cold, yet curious. "Very well," she said. "Gardener, recite the Latin name for the lily, and give us its meaning." Victor chuckled, certain of victory. "Yes, let's see if our gardener can even manage a sentence." Mateo inhaled slowly. Then, with a voice steady and resonant, he replied, "Lilium candidum." Candor, purity, brightness, light. The lily has been a symbol of innocence and renewal since antiquity. Gasps rippled through the room. His pronunciation was perfect, his delivery fluid, his tone unshakably confident. The judge's glass froze midway to her lips. Victor's smirk faltered for the first time. "Well, anyone can memorize a phrase," he snapped. "Let's give him something real." Claudette, intrigued, leaned forward. "Translate this," she said, and began to quote from Cicero, "Sedat armatogae, concedat laurea laudi." The words hung in the air, heavy with history. Mateo's eyes shone. Without missing a beat, he answered in English, "Let arms yield to the toga, let the laurel of victory yield to the voice of honor." Cicero's call for wisdom above violence. The ballroom erupted in murmurs. This was no accident. No trick of chance. Mateo spoke with the cadence of a scholar. Victor paled, but forced a laugh. Impressive, but anyone could learn a translation. He turned sharply to Claudette. "Test him harder. Prove he's bluffing." The judge hesitated, her composure cracking just slightly. She was a connoisseur of language, fluent in several tongues, but the gardener's delivery unsettled her. Still, she obliged. "Very well. Quote something of your choosing, Mateo. Something you claim to know." Mateo closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered long nights under flickering candles, reciting lines to himself while the world slept. When he opened them, his voice carried strength that silenced the room, non nobis solum nati sumus. Not for ourselves alone are we born, but for the good of others as well. The word struck like lightning, ancient wisdom echoing in the gilded hall. A hush followed, thick with awe. Even those who had mocked him minutes before sat in stunned silence. Victor's hands tightened around his glass until it nearly shattered. He could feel the tide turning. What was meant to be a public humiliation was becoming a public reckoning. The gardener was no longer their amusement, he was commanding the stage. The hush in the ballroom deepened, as though the very air refused to move. Mateo stood calm, shoulders squared, every syllable he had spoken still resonating in the minds of the audience. For the first time all evening, the gardener was not invisible. He was undeniable. Victor Langford, flushed with anger, refused to yield. Fine words, but anyone can parrot lines. If you are truly what you claim, then speak to me directly. In Latin. Let us see if you can converse rather than recite. His tone was sharp, almost desperate. The laughter that once followed him no longer came. The crowd watched him with wary curiosity instead. Mateo's gaze steadied on Victor. He responded, his voice carrying the measured rhythm of confidence. Superbia tua, Victor, est quisitas. Divici non sunt sapientia. Your arrogance, Victor, is blindness. Wealth is not wisdom. A ripple of shock ran through the crowd. Gasps, then scattered applause. This was no mere gardener fumbling through memorized texts. This was a man dismantling pride in the very language of Rome. Claudette Voss leaned forward, her icy facade melting into astonishment. Remarkable, she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. Then, louder, his grammar is flawless. His diction, precise. I would wager even some of my peers at the university could not match it. The ballroom buzzed. The elites who had sneered now leaned in, eager to witness more. Some whispered among themselves, recalling phrases they had studied in dusty textbooks but never mastered. Others looked at Mateo as if seeing him for the first time. Victor slammed his glass down on a nearby table. Enough. This is a trick. Some rehearsed performance to embarrass me. His voice cracked under the weight of desperation. The authority he once held slipped with every word. Mateo turned to him once more. He did not raise his voice, but the calm weight of his words carried across the hall, Veritas lux est, truth is light. And tonight, it has revealed everything. The crowd erupted, this time not with ridicule, but with thunderous applause. Some even rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. The tide had fully turned. The gardener had not only defended himself but had commanded the entire stage, his humility transformed into undeniable brilliance. Claudette, standing now, raised her hand to quiet the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, let it be known, Mateo has passed not only a test of knowledge but of dignity. His mastery of Latin, his clarity of thought, these are not qualities of a mere gardener. They are the marks of a true scholar. Victor's face drained of color. He opened his mouth to protest but was drowned out by applause. The power he had once wielded in the room had evaporated, replaced by whispers of scorn and disapproval. The elites no longer laughed at Mateo, they laughed at Victor. For the first time in the evening, Mateo allowed himself a small smile. Not of arrogance, not of triumph over an enemy, but of quiet vindication. He had endured their mockery with patience, and when the time came, he had answered not with anger but with truth. His father's voice echoed in his mind, words are power. And tonight, power had changed hands. The ballroom thundered with applause, the sound reverberating against crystal and marble like waves against stone. People who moments ago had sneered now clapped with genuine admiration, their eyes alight with respect. Mateo, the gardener they had mocked, stood at the center of it all, still modest in his posture, still calm in his demeanor, yet transformed in their eyes. Claudette Voss, the judge, placed her glass delicately on the table and addressed the audience. "Tonight we have witnessed more than a contest of knowledge," she declared, her voice carrying authority. "We have seen arrogance dismantled by truth, and humility revealed as the highest form of wisdom." She turned toward Mateo, inclining her head ever so slightly. "Your command of Latin is extraordinary. I would be honored to hear more from you." The crowd murmured agreement. Some even approached Mateo, offering compliments with a sincerity that contrasted sharply with their earlier mockery. One guest whispered, "Where did you learn such fluency?" Another added, "You speak as though the ancients themselves lent you their voices." Mateo responded with quiet gratitude, offering simple smiles and nods. He neither basked in their praise nor sought their validation. His dignity lay in knowing his worth did not depend on applause. Victor Langford, however, stood rigid and pale, his authority shattered. The billionaire's glass sat untouched, his lips thin with fury. Whispers around the room turned toward him now, sharp as daggers. He made a fool of himself. All that wealth, and yet so little wisdom. Arrogance meets its end. The once admiring crowd had turned, and Victor's name was now tied to humiliation. Claudette addressed him directly. "Mr. Langford, you proposed the challenge. You insisted on testing this man. And it is clear you underestimated him gravely. If your donation is as honorable as your word, then perhaps tonight's cause will at least benefit from your pride." The room chuckled softly, the remark striking with elegance. Victor's jaw tightened, but under so many watching eyes, he had no choice but to nod stiffly. "Of course," he muttered, the words tasting like ash. His humiliation was complete. Not only had his cruelty backfired, but it had cost him both dignity and fortune. Justice unfolded further. Some of his closest allies began to distance themselves, embarrassed to be associated with his display. The room's energy shifted entirely. Victor was no longer the center of admiration. He was an outcast, undone by his own arrogance. Mateo, sensing the moment had reached its end, bowed his head slightly. "I thank you all," he said softly, first in English, then repeating in Latin, "Gratias vobis ego." The phrase rolled through the hall like a blessing, simple yet profound. Claudette, for all her composure, felt something stir within her. She saw in Mateo not just knowledge but integrity. "If ever you wish to teach," she said, "I know institutions that would welcome you." Mateo smiled gently. "I am honored. But my place is where I can do the most good. The soil, the garden, the quiet labor, it is enough." His humility shone brighter than the chandeliers above. The applause swelled once more, this time not for performance but for principle. The elite stood, clapping and nodding with newfound respect. Even those who had laughed hardest now looked ashamed, their arrogance dissolved in the face of Mateo's unshakable dignity. As the evening drew to a close, Mateo slipped away as quietly as he had come. He returned to his tools, his flowers, his earth. To him, nothing had changed. He was still a gardener, still a man of the soil. But to everyone else, he had become something more, a symbol that wisdom is not the property of the wealthy, and that humility carries a strength wealth cannot buy. In the weeks that followed, whispers of that night spread through the city. Stories of the gardener who spoke in Latin reached far beyond the ballroom. Some embellished, some simplified, but the essence remained. A billionaire's mockery had been undone by the quiet power of truth. Victor Langford, once revered for his wealth, now carried the shadow of his humiliation wherever he went. Deals slipped through his fingers, invitations arrived less frequently, and his name became a cautionary tale whispered in corridors of power: "Do not mistake riches for wisdom." Mateo, meanwhile, continued tending gardens. The flowers bloomed brighter under his care, as if reflecting his spirit. Children from nearby villages sometimes gathered to hear him recite the old phrases, their laughter and curiosity a far sweeter audience than the elites could ever offer. He taught them what his father had taught him: words are power, but only when used with honor. And so, life went on. Mateo's worth was never measured by the applause of the ballroom, nor diminished by the scorn of the arrogant. His true value lay in the quiet strength of his character, in his love for knowledge, and in the way he carried himself, with humility unshaken and dignity intact. Justice had been served. The proud were humbled, the humble exalted. And the gardener, who needed no crown or fortune, remained what he had always been, a man at peace with truth. And so, a gardener's humility toppled the arrogance of a billionaire. In a single night, Mateo showed that true greatness isn't measured by riches, power, or polished accents, but by wisdom, dignity, and the courage to stand firm in truth. His story is a reminder that the underestimated can rise, and that respect cannot be bought, it must be earned. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever seen someone underestimated, only to surprise everyone with their hidden strength? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. Let's build a community where humility and resilience are celebrated. And if you believe more people should hear stories where justice prevails and the arrogant are humbled, make sure to follow this channel. Together, we'll keep spreading messages that inspire, uplift, and remind us all that character is the greatest wealth of all.